Hey everyone, ever wondered how the inner circle of Hitler truly operated and how the greatest Nazi leaders met their fates? Tonight, we're diving deep into the collapse of the Third Reich, exploring the shocking secrets behind Hitler's closest accomplices, the atrocities they orchestrated, and the dramatic trials that finally held them accountable. This isn't just history, it's a chilling journey into power, betrayal, and the human cost of fanaticism. Get ready to uncover the hidden stories of Goering, Himmler, Goebbels, Albert Speer, and the victims who suffered under their rule. Before we begin, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into espionage, history's darkest chapters, and the untold stories of the men who shaped the world. Now let's get started. When Hitler triumphed in the summer of 1940, he was acclaimed by the Germans. His people took him for an infallible genius, endowed with extraordinary intelligence. Only, it was a picture created from scratch. The myth of Hitler sold to the Germans was that of a Führer who knew everything, who worked day and night, whose office light never turned off. This was the exact opposite of reality. Hitler was a dilettante. He never really worked. He was someone who could not stand long-term intellectual effort, long-winded and unable to read a file of more than 20 pages. Hitler did not work. In fact, he liked to retreat to his refuge, like an artist who hovered above reality. A handful of employees worked in his place. Their names were Joseph Goebbels, Heinrich Himmler, and Albert Speer. Hitler took more than 15 years to recruit them. To say today that he was a good human resource manager would mean he surrounded himself well, choosing as companions people who brought him something extra each time. Who were these men in Hitler's shadow? What was each person's role? Around the Führer, there was an extensive network of collaborators. First of all, there was his close guard, the only ones who had direct access to him. Among his faithful, there was an essential trio whose first member was Hermann Goering. He was an ogre who thought only of getting rich, bulimic, opportunistic, and addicted to drugs. He loved luxury and extravagance. The second, Joseph Goebbels, was a failed writer. His leg disability made him complex and bitter. He avenged himself through a radical hatred and lived only through his idol, Hitler. The third, Heinrich Himmler, was a petty bourgeois, cold, stubborn, meticulous. A smooth man who would become the killer of the century by organizing what the Nazis called the final solution. The second circle was composed of younger and more ambitious men who joined Hitler in the 1930s when he came to power and distributed ministries. Among them, Albert Speer would rise to the top. Under the appearance of a distinguished architect, he was actually a great manipulator who shared Hitler's megalomaniac dreams and was ready to do anything to become his favorite. Finally, at the bottom of the scale, there were the executors on the ground, the Third Reich officials who committed the crimes and atrocities. Like Rudolf Höss, the commander of the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp. Totally cold and contemptuous. This father, installed with his wife and 5 children in a house on the edge of the camp, organized the extermination of 1,100,000 people. At his side was Dr. Josef Mengele, in charge of medical experiments. He embodied the cruelty of the Nazis. Without pity for his victims, this SS doctor carried out the worst mutilations in the camps, including on children. Without them, the worst crimes would not have been possible. To please Hitler, they competed with one another. Around Hitler, they all hated each other. It was even the mode of operation of this little community, encouraged by Hitler himself, who stirred up rivalries, competition, and emulation. Hitler, still unknown, would recruit his accomplices in the early 1920s in a troubled Germany. The vanquished of the First World War had only one army left, reduced to 100,000 men. So, everywhere, former soldiers formed small groups of mercenaries. The country was afraid of falling into civil war. In this atmosphere, a small group from the south of Germany chose as its symbol the swastika. It was called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP. Born in Munich, this small party attracted workers and the unemployed. In the front row of the spectators was Hitler, 30 years old, a small army employee, not yet its leader. He was only its 55th member. This veteran of 1914-1918, who had experienced battles on the front, had reached only the rank of corporal. Since the defeat, he thought only of avenging Germany. Hitler quickly rose as the leader of the small party by speaking in Munich breweries. He denounced the humiliations inflicted on his country, but his means were still very limited. Installed in the back room of a brewery, this was his first office. He wrote his speeches on a modest corner of a table. To have more echo, Hitler needed more prestigious representatives. In the fall of 1922, when a notable personality came to listen to him, he felt he had found the ideal candidate. Hitler was full of joy because he said, "You see, there we have someone wealthy, a war hero. That is the propaganda we need. He's someone we absolutely must have as a member of our party." The new recruit had a certain panache. Hermann Goering, 27, had been a fighter pilot during the Great War. In combat in the skies, he shot down 21 planes. Goering was even decorated for his bravery with the Cross of Merit, the military's highest honor. They were practically the only heroes that German propaganda put forward. Postcards were made, and everyone in Germany was more or less aware of the exploits of this or that officer. That's why Goering was very famous. With his decorations, he was truly a character of that time. After the war, since the German military aviation was disbanded, he was unemployed. But in Hitler's eyes, Goering presented another interest. He had connections in high places. Goering brought him prestige and a considerable social network. The flying ace had married a wealthy woman, Karin von Fock, from the Swedish nobility. They met in her family's castle near Stockholm. The couple moved in aristocratic circles, and justly, Hitler needed donors to finance his small movement. Upon joining the party, Goering was immediately propelled to the head of the armed militia called the SA. Less than a year later, in Munich, the Nazi Party wanted to take power by a coup. During this November 1923 putsch, a gunfight broke out between the Nazis and the police. There were 16 dead. For the Nazis, it was a total failure. Hitler was locked up for 8 months in the fortress prison of Landsberg. His party was dissolved. In his cell, he wrote Mein Kampf, in French, Mon combat. Seriously wounded, Goering fled. He was inadmissible on German soil. He needed surgery and was treated with morphine to dull his pain, becoming addicted to the drug. Goering took refuge in Stockholm, in his wife's country. Without work, without a future, he suffered bouts of violence. It gave him a mental breakdown, and from the moment he became difficult to manage, his wife preferred to put him in an asylum to be treated. Goering made several stays in this psychiatric hospital around Stockholm. According to his confidential medical records, he was admitted for morphine poisoning. Goering was portrayed as self-centered and suicidal. He explained his mental disorders by saying he saw himself as politically dead. But the following year, it is reborn from its ashes. Thanks to the 1925 presidential election, an amnesty has just been proclaimed. He is allowed to return to Germany. Without his Führer, Goering is nothing. He hopes to regain his place as a leader in the party, but the connection no longer flows with Hitler. Hitler, at first, was not so warm to see his ex-chief of the SA again, because now he had another SA leader. So Goering reminds Hitler of the services he rendered him. He said to him, "I have lost everything. I have always been your most faithful collaborator, so now it's up to you to show me a little appreciation." Hitler needs dedicated men, and he finds him a new place. Goering no longer fights in the streets, but he must conquer the social salons. He will struggle to regain his rank. He does not succeed until 1928, when he enters the Reichstag, the German parliament, elected among the first 12 Nazi deputies. In 1932, he even becomes president of this assembly. The second accomplice Hitler recruits sees his career in Nazism take off at the age of 29. Hitler begins by entrusting Joseph Goebbels with a very delicate mission. He sends him to Berlin, the capital of Germany. With its 4 million inhabitants, it was at that time the greatest metropolis of Europe. It was made up of huge suburbs where the workers were crowded. It was nicknamed Red Berlin because the communists had made it their stronghold. Hitler launches a huge challenge to this lame little man. make the Nazis the first political force in Berlin. And the Führer knows he can ask Goebbels for anything. He is a man overwhelmed with gratitude, hungry for recognition. He finds it in Hitler, whom he considers a charismatic, intelligent, and superior man, toward whom he develops an almost romantic attachment. It is a real emotional dependence on Hitler, whose recognition, friendly gestures, and kind words he constantly seeks. Goebbels owes everything to Hitler because until they meet, his life was just a series of failures. Suffering an illness in early childhood, Goebbels is disabled in one leg. He is ashamed of it. During the First World War, he dreamed of becoming a soldier. To explain his infirmity, he preferred to lie, hiding his handicap by claiming, "I was hurt during the Great War. I am a hero of the Great War." But he did not fight during the war simply because he was never enlisted. A doctor of literature from the university, an unsuccessful writer, he could not find a job up to his ambitions. Goebbels worked 9 months as a bank clerk before resigning. Only Hitler gives meaning to his life. He is no longer the little bank clerk, nor the struggling writer rejected by big publishers. He is now the leader of the Nazi Party in one of the most important areas, the capital of the Reich. Upon his arrival in Berlin, the new chief finds only 100 active members and small offices. Everything is to be built. Goebbels begins by creating a journal, not Der Angriff, the attack. To make the Nazis known, he chooses a radical strategy: stir up hatred. Less than a week after his arrival, Goebbels sends his strongmen to challenge the communists in their neighborhoods. Violent fights break out. Mass arrests take place. The police ban the Nazi Party in the capital of the Reich. But that doesn't matter to Goebbels. The movement feeds on scandal. In this violent climate, Nazi propaganda finds itself a martyr. In 1930, a young activist, Horst Wessel, was stabbed to death by a communist. In the presence of Hitler and Goering, his funeral, held with great pomp, becomes an opportunity for an impressive demonstration of Nazi strength. And Goebbels keeps throwing oil on the fire. Did he really deserve this death? He had the courage to walk in the storm, this young German worker, upright and proud. To reward him, Hitler offers Goebbels a promotion, appointing him chief of party propaganda. The third man of Hitler's close guard does not have the usual profile of workers and the unemployed who joined Nazism. Heinrich Himmler is a young bourgeois obsessed with the superiority of the Germanic race. At the party headquarters in Munich, in a propaganda film dating from 1929, Himmler appears as a young man with glasses, still looking like a small, subordinate secretary at the orders of his boss. The others do not yet perceive his ambitions. Himmler comes from a good family, Catholic, perfectly integrated into society. He is the son of a Greek and Latin teacher who became the headmaster of one of the best high schools in the city. Nothing is missing, but from a very young age, he joins at Centritten, the most radical racist groups. Catherine Himmler, Ernst's granddaughter, the youngest brother of Heinrich Himmler, is a political scientist who studies her family's history. The three Himmler brothers became virulent Nazis. Their ideology was rooted in a feeling of superiority, the belief that the German people were above others. This racist discourse also advocates a return to the land. Himmler becomes an agricultural engineer. With his wife, Marga, they buy a small farm where they want to live in self-sufficiency to protect themselves from the outside world, which they consider rotten. Alongside Hitler, Himmler is submissive, but he also has real influence over him. We have since learned that he defended his own beliefs and often obtained Hitler's agreement for ideas he had himself. Himmler, the young bourgeois, believes in Nazi ideas, but he does not like to mingle with grassroots activists who constitute the heart of the party. In Himmler's eyes, these people are, one might say, brainless fools. It's like a football supporters club, Lazio or PSG, in their good times. In reaction, Himmler creates a classier group within the party. These disciplined men in black will form an elite under his authority. The acronym of this unit in German consists of 2 letters, the SS. All must be of pure Germanic origins. They will be the most fanatical among the fanatics. When, that evening in 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany, once again, he doesn't want to work as his role would require. He doesn't like being forced to work daily from 9 to 5. For him, it is unthinkable. When he began his career as Chancellor, after only a few days, he immediately insisted that it was not his role to work. Once in power, the sharing of roles between his accomplices will create winners and losers. Goebbels does not immediately become a minister. As for Goering, he triumphs. Hitler brings him into his first government in 1933, and no one will hoard as many titles as him. In 12 years of power, one only needs to see the variety of his uniforms: President of Prussia, Grand Huntsman of the Reich, Air Minister, Marshal of the Empire. A riot of decorations that triggers the jealousy of his great rival, Joseph Goebbels. Goebbels, at the start, is quite skeptical of Goering's role. He describes him as an unbearable balloon, puffed up with vanity and self-importance, a vulgar pleasure seeker, a beau, a nouveau riche who craves tinsel, who struts around in ridiculous uniforms packed with medals and fodder. It's a puppet in his eyes. Only, Goering is also a strong man. He installed the dictatorship in 1933. When the Reichstag catches fire, under mysterious conditions, Goering, Speaker of the Assembly, attributes the fire to the communists and is threatening. I will sweep with an iron broom everyone who got positions and privileges exclusively thanks to their political affiliation, red or black. I will knock them down. A wave of repression falls on Germany. More than 3,000 opponents of Nazism are arrested without trial. Goering creates a new political police, the Gestapo. As early as 1933, the first concentration camp opens in Dachau. Opponents are subject to forced labor. Goering earns points in Hitler's esteem. Goering has, each time, front-page attention when Hitler is looking for someone to give a difficult job to one of his collaborators. Joseph Goebbels rises to power as Hitler's Minister of Propaganda and orchestrates the persecution of Jews in Germany. But Joseph Goebbels, too, ends up receiving a tailor-made position, a great ministry for propaganda. The frustrated writer now has the power to choose the authorized books and ban others. Books by Jewish writers or authors considered degenerate are burned in large public ceremonies, like that evening in May 1933 near the University of Berlin. You do well to entrust the demons of the past to the flames. The German man of the future will not only be a man of books, but also a man of character, and to that we want to train you. He is also a fanatical anti-Semite. When the Nazis came to power, Jews only represented 0.8% of the population in Germany. But Goebbels imagines a way to persecute them. Trucks drive through the streets to spread a message. Let's be German, and let us no longer be Jews. My dear compatriots, this morning at 10 a.m., we have started the boycott of Jewish traders. Stores run by Jews are pointed out, and the Nazis firmly deter customers from entering. Goebbels now wants to impose his messages on the airwaves, and so that propaganda enters every home, he even has a cheap radio mode on purpose. This climate he creates in Germany is particularly oppressive in the family of young Margit, 5 years old, who lives in Berlin. Her father is a Jewish bookseller and sells banned books. I did not understand everything, but I felt the atmosphere. We had received from Goebbels these people's radio stations, and I always heard, "The Jews are our misfortune." It was Hitler's voice and that of Goebbels, and I didn't know at all what a Jew was. Joseph Goebbels monitors everything, theater, cinema, and he's watching the news through an all-powerful censorship committee. Goebbels also orchestrates a monumental staging of the regime. Behind the scenes, he takes care of the smallest details. Throughout the 1930s, in huge gatherings filmed like Hollywood blockbusters, Hitler is presented to the people like the Messiah. The career of Joseph Goebbels is at its peak, but his tormented character will take over. Goebbels is completely at ease in crisis situations, in situations of distress and disaster. There, he is in his element. He needs sound and fury. The storm for Goebbels will come from his private life. He married Magda in 1931, with Adolf Hitler as the witness of their marriage. Their children are used over time by propaganda. The Goebbels form the model family scheme. Dear Daddy, do you see us walking towards you? You already guessed that we are here to congratulate you because you are celebrating your birthday. Helmut! The names of the 6 children all start with the letter H in honor of Hitler. Magda Goebbels, decorated by the regime, embodies the ideal Nazi mother. Every year, a short sequence is staged to celebrate the father's birthday. Say, Dear Daddy. Quick say, Dear Daddy. Stronger. We congratulate you really for your birthday because you are at work and you don't know what we're doing here. Joseph Goebbels cultivates this image of a good father, like on Christmas Eve 1936, when he gets filmed in a train distributing gifts to the most modest German children. Thanks for the short note. You want that? Only the reality has nothing to do with this picture-perfect image. Goebbels is known for multiplying his adventures. He needs entertainment. He needs action. He needs events. As he loves cinema and has a large artistic culture, he participates. One of the ways to participate in the life of cinema is to make castings and say, Miss, come and have tea. He is known to be, I quote, by his nickname in the film world, the Babelsberg Goat. Babelsberg is German Hollywood. It's in the studios near Potsdam, the Babelsberg Goat. In 1936, Goebbels strikes up a romantic affair with a 22-year-old starlet, Lida Barova. Hello, what? We're going on a trip, right? Today? It's a faux pas that will have repercussions on Goebbels' career. To put an end to this scandalous liaison, his desperate wife Magda threatens to divorce. She confides in the couple's closest friend, Adolf Hitler. Hitler has no family. The German family is that of Joseph and Magda Goebbels. So when this family starts to fail, Hitler is not happy at all. He requires Goebbels to break this bond and stop humiliating Magda Goebbels, whom Hitler loves as a remarkable German woman and mother. Hitler is furious, not only for the image, but also for Magda Goebbels, for whom he has much affection, and he turns away from Goebbels, who suffers from it. In Hitler's inner circle, a newcomer will take advantage of this disgrace and achieve an exceptional rise. Albert Speer. However, he starts from afar among the men who joined Nazism later. In these images from 1935, we already perceive their complicity. Hitler draws. Next to him, in his impeccable suit, stands Albert Speer, 27, a young architect who hasn't built anything yet. In his youth, Hitler himself drew sketches of pharaonic buildings, dreaming of seeing them rise from the ground the day he would come to power. Hitler and Speer have known each other for only a year, but they share a common passion for architecture. Hitler saw through Speer practically the life he dreamed of. He always said he wanted to become an architect himself. And Speer adapted to Hitler's demands. Their projects were always gigantic, megalomaniac. Hitler noticed Speer on May 1st, 1933, at Berlin Airport on Labor Day, which brought together over 1 million people, a human tide. Hitler is fascinated by the festivities, which end with a spectacular fireworks display where his face crackles above the assembly. The organization is signed by Albert Speer, this great bourgeois who joined the Nazi Party and to whom Goebbels passed his first orders. It was Goebbels who presented Speer to Hitler, but of course, over time, a rivalry was born. Goebbels always found it very important to be part of Hitler's entourage, and in this case, Speer was becoming a rival. Very quickly, Speer occupies a place favored by Hitler. Unlike Goebbels, he is the permanent guest from his lair in the mountains. Both appreciate the same pompous style, which comes from antiquity. First of all, Speer is the architect of the huge parade ground of Nuremberg, copied from a temple dedicated to Zeus. For party congresses, this esplanade can accommodate more than 340,000 people. Speer then builds the German pavilion at the foot of the Eiffel Tower, installed for the Paris exhibition in 1937. That same year, Hitler gives him the Order of the Century, Germania, the future capital of his empire. This disproportionate building site was meant to last until 1950. It involved rebuilding Berlin along a 5-kilometer avenue called Victory Avenue. Buildings in Germania were to be the greatest ever made. At the very end, a reserved cupola at the Great Hall of the People would be 16 times bigger than that of St. Peter's in Rome, which would still make it the largest building in the world today. For the people of Berlin, it would be an earthquake. 50,000 apartments would need to be razed, and nearly 200,000 Berliners would need to be relocated, despite an already great lack of housing. To test the speed of his architect, Hitler challenged Speer to build the first Germania building in just 1 year. 8,000 workers from all over Germany worked simultaneously, day and night. They were building the future Reich Chancellery. To please Hitler, Albert Speer delivered the building 2 days before the set date. Hitler took possession of his building, which was supposed to dazzle the ambassadors of the world. Its chancellery was of showy luxury, with a marble hall, a huge office for Hitler, and galleries twice as big as those of the Palace of Versailles. Albert Speer had caught up with all his competitors in Hitler's esteem. The proximity of power fascinated him. Speer was not even 30 years old and had already become one of Hitler's most influential advisors. Meanwhile, in Munich, one of Hitler's historical accomplices, Himmler, received no ministry. He was just named chief of the Bavarian police. Ready for anything, he carried out a bloody purge within the party known as the Night of the Long Knives. It was one of the many steps he accomplished on his path to power. Hitler feared the power of another leader, Ernst Röhm, very popular and leading the SA, a powerful Nazi militia recognized by its brown shirts. Under his command, Himmler supervised Röhm's assassination and that of his entire staff. Even at the cost of blood, if a comrade stood in his way, Himmler saw no inconvenience in eliminating them, even if they represented a great danger. Himmler emerged as the big winner of this bloodbath. His organization, the SS, the Black Order, no longer had rivals. Himmler was able to do much more than just command a militia. For him, the SS was a real political project, which he managed to convince Hitler to endorse. Himmler worshipped the Germanic race and referred to a dead king from the Middle Ages. He meditated on this king's grave and introduced Hitler as his successor throughout history. King Henry I transmitted 1,000 years ago to our Führer Adolf Hitler human values and the role of guide for Germany. Himmler wanted to build a new society, deeply racist, where pure Germans would be the only masters for centuries to come. To ensure the reproduction of the superior race, Himmler founded special maternities where the SS could bring up newborns according to the regime's plans. It worked like controlled horse breeding, fillies in stables, stallions to impregnate them, and so forth. To found the superior race, the Nazis also sought to eliminate what they called worthless lives. From 1935, propaganda films were broadcast in cinemas, showing the disabled in a frightening light. The films emphasized the financial burden these patients represented, including those with hereditary diseases or epilepsy, to manipulate public opinion. One estimate suggested 1.2 billion marks would correspond to the financial cost of all hereditary diseases. The Nazis used these figures to justify the crimes they were planning. From 1939, real killing programs began to take shape, especially targeting the physically and mentally disabled. Himmler sought to remodel everything and wanted the SS to have its own beliefs. I swear here to Adolf Hitler, loyalty and bravery. Strange ceremonies took place in the chapels of Wolfsburg Castle, the SS training center, with the black sun as an occult symbol. Baptisms and weddings were conducted according to SS rites. The Nazis wanted to sweep away all existing religious beliefs. If they had won, there would have been a new calendar, new parties, new liturgies, and a new baptism and party, which would have replaced Christmas. This was the Nazi utopia, a revolution so vast it would change everything, including belief and God. In secret, in the mid-1930s, Hitler made a strategic decision to share his plans first with his right arm. Hitler fixed a program that essentially stated Germany must be ready to go to war in 4 years. To carry out this program, he created a new administration with a 4-year plan led by Hermann Goering. Overnight, in 1936, Goering was propelled to the head of German industry. His financial envelope was unlimited, and his commands mobilized more than 228 factories, with firepower unique in the world at the time. The Germans, deprived of an army since their defeat in the First World War, were preparing their revenge. My dear compatriots, my dear brothers in arms, what is the point of this 4-year plan? I could sum it up in one essential sentence: the backup of German honor and the backup of German life. Hermann Goering's new functions allowed him to amass great wealth. On his birthdays, industrialists showered him with gifts, collectibles, master paintings, and precious stones. The corrupt system they put in place was meticulously organized. His office would send small lists, like wedding lists, to various company representatives, requesting that the marshal be presented with particular works of art or other prized objects. Goering emulated Roman emperors, reveling in eccentricities, such as posing with a lion cub. Hitler designated Goering as his successor. Since the death of his first wife Corinne from cancer, the Germans had missed a first lady. His second marriage in Berlin was worthy of a crowned head, with 30,000 soldiers lining the route. Hitler, serving as a witness, favored the grandiose nuptials to conceal his own private life. Emma and Hermann Goering came to embody the official couple of the regime, increasingly representing Nazi power at public events, such as receptions held in honor of Mussolini. To host these events, Goering had outfitted his vast estate on the outskirts of Berlin, with hundreds of works of art adorning the walls, alongside numerous hunting trophies. Dieter Wellershoff, who met Goering several times, recalled being enlisted in the Hitler Youth and, at 17, serving briefly as a soldier on Goering's property. When reviewing the troops, Goering would say, "Once I walk past you, you can relax," meaning they no longer had to stand at attention. Soldiers had to tread carefully to avoid puddles and mud for the fat and heavy marshal, a grotesque figure in every sense. While Goering occupied the first stage of the war plan, Hitler's impatience was increasingly difficult to contain. The Führer was now ready to go to war, regularly attending battle rehearsals. Despite the immense exercises in natural scale, Goering struggled to curb Hitler's impatience. He warned Hitler that Germany was not yet ready, though he himself had a year's lead on the plan. Hitler, living as if in a movie or play, ordered the attack anyway. War in 1939 unfolded with almost disconcerting ease for Hitler and his accomplices. The German army seemed invincible. Within a single year, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France were invaded. Half of Europe collapsed, and the division of the empire among Hitler's collaborators was destined to be bloody. Goebbels managed administration in one area, Goering in another, and Himmler in yet another, creating overlapping jurisdictions and inevitable friction as the plunder began. Goering made Paris his personal hunting ground, arriving in a convertible limo to roam the streets and descend on Place Vendôme and the Ritz. He looted French museums, seizing hundreds of paintings by Matisse, Monet, and Cézanne to complete his immense collection. Hitler also visited Paris, accompanied by Albert Speer, promising to copy the city's most beautiful monuments for Germania. Hitler was captivated by Paris, the Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe, and planned to reproduce it in Berlin on an even larger scale. Back in Berlin, Marshal Goering sat in front-row seats, directing military operations, yet concealing the grim reality from Hitler. From the public perspective, Germany's campaign was a dazzling success, but economically it was a disaster. After weeks of fighting, Germany had no bombs, very little ammunition, and few planes. Fearful of displeasing Hitler, Goering did not reveal this. Instead, he boastfully promised to crush England in just 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Himmler carved out an empire in Eastern Europe, overseeing a cold, methodical policy of extermination. Visiting Poland, he found his SS soldiers already conducting a racially motivated war. Himmler spent his time motivating his troops, justifying systematic killings as a morally necessary, albeit painful, task. From 1939 in Poland, and then from 1941 in the USSR, the Nazis experimented with mass murders and deportations, building a colonial empire populated by slaves and rid of Jews. This project involved the deaths of millions from hunger, an imaginary of letting die. Small mobile SS killing units, called Einsatzgruppen, operated in Ukraine and the Baltic countries, committing atrocities at a frantic pace. more than 1 million people were executed by shootings. In August 1941, Himmler visited Minsk, Belarus, to assess the killing strategy firsthand, inspecting Soviet prisoners and witnessing executions personally. During a visit, he observed the execution of 100 Jews, meant as a demonstration of method, and fainted at the sight. Despite being one of the most fanatical anti-Semites of the Third Reich, Himmler's concern was not for the victims, but for the psychological trauma of his men. He sought to ensure his soldiers, not born killers, could carry out their tasks effectively. After the killings in Minsk, he demanded in Berlin that methods be found to spare his men's mental health. In 1941, different methods of mass murder coexisted, but by the end of the year, Hitler issued an order unifying the procedures: the extermination of all Jews in Europe. 3 years earlier, Hitler had already warned that if a global war broke out, it would be the pretext to annihilate the Jewish race. His prophecy came true following the United States' entry into the war in December 1941, finally motivating the implementation of this horrific decision. The final solution was decided by Hitler. At this moment, mass executions took place. In that year, practically 4 million Jews were exterminated. For Himmler, it would not be possible to murder millions of people by mass shootings, and it was for this reason that gassing was seen as an effective means to protect the killers. Gassing was not introduced to kill more people. Rather, its major merit was to spare the killers. There was no more direct contact with the victims, and bodies were collected afterward. Himmler then decided to concentrate all extermination policies in a single place, a gigantic site that would become the largest of the concentration camps and killing centers, to which 1,300,000 people would be deported. The site had to be central to the Nazi Empire, well connected to all parts of Europe, and endowed with a killing line that was extremely fast and efficient. The real railway and central hub of the Nazi Empire, chosen for this purpose, was Auschwitz. Himmler entrusted Auschwitz to a field official, one of the worst specialists in the camps, Rudolf Höss, who at the age of 40 became the director of one of the largest projects of the Third Reich. The pictures of Auschwitz that are widely known are those taken at the liberation of the camp in 1945 by Soviet soldiers. To direct this vast complex, Heinrich Himmler had a choice between multiple managers, but selected Rudolf Höss, a man with a murderous past. In 1923, Höss had assassinated a communist who had been imprisoned for 5 years. Upon his release, Himmler took him under his wing and found him a new profession. In the early 1930s, Himmler suggested to Höss that he join the SS. Rainer Höss, the grandson of Rudolf Höss, recounts that his father, Hans, was the youngest son of the commandant. Höss first worked at the Dachau concentration camp for 4 years, then became head of detention and later deputy director at Sachsenhausen concentration camp. In 1940, thanks to Himmler, he was appointed commander of Auschwitz. Upon arriving in Auschwitz in 1940 to establish the camp, Höss encountered only a small town of 15,000 inhabitants, as well as an old barracks of the Polish army, where he established the first place of confinement, Auschwitz First. He also identified a villa adjoining the camp, expropriated from its Polish owners, which he took over. From the second-floor office window, he had a bird's-eye view of the crematorium, which did not trouble him. The commander settled in the villa with his wife Edwige and their 5 children. The family focused solely on their social ascent. Photographs from their family album attest to the unexpected comfort of their new environment. 70 meters from the crematorium, the garden, surrounded by a large wall, became the children's favorite playground, spacious enough for indoor cycling. At that time, the host family transitioned from anonymity to VIP status. Thanks to the concentration camps, they led a comfortable life with a workforce reduced to slavery. An inmate served as a gardener, others as servants inside the house, possibly caring for the children as needed. Höss wrote in his memoirs, "It was heaven," and, like all SS leaders, Höss was constantly motivated by Himmler, whose words were recorded for internal use. Most of you know what 100 corpses, 500 or 1,000 corpses have stood in these circumstances and remained worthy, except for a few cases of human failure, It has toughened us up. It's a page of glory in our history which was never written and never will be again. As early as 1941, Himmler ordered Hearst to run Auschwitz on an industrial scale, receiving more and more convoys, as the red brick buildings of the old barracks were no longer sufficient. 3 kilometers from this first site began the construction of Birkenau, a gigantic concentration camp and killing center, where deportees were sent directly to the gas chambers upon arrival. Hearst also used prisoners as labor for a whole industrial complex, including a large chemical plant at the cutting edge of contemporary technology producing rubber for tires. Auschwitz, the camps, the city, the factories, was a permanent construction site, incessant from 1940 until nearly the end of the war in 1945. Auschwitz continued to diversify. After the chemical factory, Host developed a major agricultural project with Himmler, who had studied agronomy since 1918. They shared a common passion, and Host supervised the implementation of greenhouses for plant research. By 1943, the Birkenau camp had expanded tremendously, and a new agricultural center was established in the hamlet of Rajsko. During the war, Auschwitz became a model city for the Nazis, with its population quadrupling. Within the camp, alongside Rudolf Höss, other prominent Nazi criminals benefited from arriving convoys. Sons of wealthy industrialists and Dr. Josef Mengele conducted medical experiments. Mengele led his official research in the camp as though it were a butcher shop. In the medical services of the camps and medical academies, Nazi doctors carried out horrific mutilations, especially on the bodies of Jewish and Romani deportees. These doctors had total power over individuals who were no longer considered human but treated as materials for research deemed necessary to advance medicine. Mengele's experiments often required children. In a column of little survivors filmed in 1945, 2 little twin sisters in the front row held hands. They were Hungarian Jewish girls, Miriam and Eva, 11 years old at the time. They remembered being little children, between 2 and 16 years old, hungry, with no rights, but with a fierce determination to survive another day. When Eva arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1944 with her family of 5, she immediately underwent the SS selection process upon arrival, directed toward Mengele's experiments. A Nazi officer noticed that the twins were dressed alike and called out, "Twins! Twins!" He asked their mother if they were indeed twins, and she responded, "Is it good for her?" The officer confirmed and immediately pushed the mother in one direction and separated the twins, who were crying. Stripped of their belongings, 4 family members were sent to the gas chamber. Eva and her sister survived solely to be used in Mengele's experiments. Every day, they were brought to the camp's medical service, where Eva recalls receiving at least 5 injections per day in her right arm, with a small amount of blood drawn from her left arm. What was in those injections Eva and her sister did not know at the time, and unfortunately, she still does not know today. The injections made Eva seriously ill and caused a very high fever. The next day, Dr. Mengele arrived with 4 other doctors. He did not examine her. He merely looked at her temperature chart and, laughing sarcastically, said, "Too bad she's so young and she only has 2 weeks to live." Mengele's experiments on the twins, acts of torture, played a strategic role for the Nazis. At the very heart of Nazi ideology was the belief that Aryan blood was rare, and everything had to be done to promote reproduction and allow the growth of the Aryan population. They sought methods to encourage births of twins and triplets, even attempting to mate twins of reproductive age to see if the girl would become pregnant in order to increase the Aryan race. Eva and her sister survived, though forever bearing serious physical impairments. At Auschwitz, 1,100,000 people perished. From the end of 1941, Hitler and his accomplices began experiencing their first setbacks. Goering considered waging war simultaneously in Western and Eastern Europe to be madness. But again, he did not confront Hitler. Initially skeptical about an offensive toward the East, Goering quickly realized that Hitler had made up his mind. Despite disagreements, Speer's miracle of doubling armament production and Goebbels' efforts to rally the German people set the rule for Goering. If Hitler made a decision, It was up to him to obey orders. And yet, Goering was right. Against the USSR, the German army had not anticipated the severity of the freezing winter, and losses in front of Stalingrad were enormous. At that time, young Dieter, having left the Hitler Youth, fought on the Russian front in the Hermann Goering division at just 17 years old. He recalled that Goering did not want war, telling Hitler, "We don't want to play in a game of chance," to which Hitler replied, "I haven't always played only games of chance." Engaged in multiple battles, the Germans were missing necessary armaments, but Hitler refused to hear any complaints. He searched within his inner circle for a capable accomplice who could promise a miracle. Goering, once head of the armaments industry, was a candidate, but Hitler preferred a more motivated employee, his architect, Albert Speer. Hitler told Speer, "You must become Minister of Armaments." Speer protested, citing his lack of training, but Hitler insisted, and Speer accepted the mission. Without Speer, the war might not have lasted as long. As Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production, he visited large arms companies, thanking workers for their efforts in dramatically increasing production. Hitler demanded that production rates be doubled, which initially seemed nearly impossible for Speer. Men had been sent to the front, and women had replaced them in factories, often encouraged by propaganda. Seamstresses, saleswomen, and other civilians now worked in arms production, yet it still fell short of Hitler's exorbitant targets. In addition, Speer was responsible for supervising the development of secret weapons, particularly the V-1 and V-2 missiles, the first ballistic missiles in history capable of striking England. Against all odds, Speer achieved his miracle. Despite Allied bombings in 1943, including the destruction of towns and industrial sites like Hamburg, he managed to double armament production. Cannons and tanks were assembled on massive factory chains where workers labored more than 70 hours per week. To safeguard production from bombing, the Nazis planned underground factories. In central Germany, 150 kilometers from Hanover, they constructed a sprawling network beneath a hill at Mittelbau-Dora. Over 12 kilometers of galleries, 45 bays, forming the world's largest underground factory for V-2 missile assembly. Thousands of deportees from concentration camps were imprisoned there, forced to work like slaves. Of the 60,000 prisoners in the tunnels, 20,000 perished, including over 2,000 French. Speer later claimed ignorance of these barbaric living conditions, which made his industrial miracle possible. Hitler regarded him as an organizational genius and decorated him. Speer's ambition irritated rivals, as he succeeded in instrumentalizing the camp system for the arms industry. Apart from Hitler, Himmler feared Speer most, because Speer always managed to win over Hitler. Despite Speer's successes, the war situation worsened. Reports from the Russian front were increasingly catastrophic. 200,000 soldiers were taken prisoner. Goering now felt the physical and psychological weight of defeat. His drug use skyrocketed. He became puffy and glassy-eyed, weighing over 120 kilograms. He felt useless and attempted to calm himself with morphine or other medications. At this point, both the German public and Hitler himself became increasingly critical of him. On the Eastern Front, when Marshal Goering inspected the Panzer Division named after him, soldiers had to pretend to believe in victory. Among them was young Dieter. They knew the war was lost, but could only think it, not say it openly, for speaking out could result in being shot. To curb demotivation, Hitler needed a capable collaborator to rally the Germans behind him. It was time for his most fanatical accomplices to step into the light. On February 18, 1943, at the Berlin Sports Palace, Goebbels orchestrated a communications operation. He gathered a crowd of convinced Nazis as well as injured soldiers from the front, carefully selecting 14,000 spectators. The English claimed that the German people opposed total war measures, but Goebbels challenged this, asking, "Do you want total war?" His words created an atmosphere of hysteria. He continued, "Do you want this war so total and so radical that we can imagine? Are you determined to follow the Führer to hell in order to achieve victory by accepting even the toughest trials?" That evening, Goebbels, in a trance, accomplished what he deemed the most successful performance of his career. Germany must sacrifice until the last person. Germany would never capitulate. Goebbels was smart enough to realize that the situation was difficult, even potentially desperate. If victory were possible, it would be thanks to energy, will, and the sense of sacrifice. If defeat was inevitable, the Nazis would disappear in such a racket, such a crash, such an apocalypse, that at least their sacrifice would be immortalized. Meanwhile, his eternal rival Goering was finally disgraced. Goebbels returned to the fore, deploying extraordinary energy, visiting bombed cities, listening to complaints, awarding medals, and running soup kitchens. He re-emerged like a vice Hitler, a second Führer in service to the disaster. Goebbels also expanded mobilization for all Germans. Men were now enrolled up to age 60, and the age of the youngest lowered to just 16. As the Allies approached, new recruits went to the front in their everyday clothes, with whatever weapons they could muster. Goebbels named this operation People's Storm. But in Berlin, in ruins, where locals scavenged through trash to eat, yet another piece of news shook Nazi morale. In Normandy, the Allies had just landed, and day by day, the collapse of the Reich loomed. Little Margit, a Jewish girl hiding in Berlin, learned that her father had gone into exile in China to escape the Nazis. From her hiding place in July 1944, she regained hope hearing news on the radio, an assassination attempt on Hitler. She recalls first hearing Hitler's voice on the radio saying, "Providence saved me." Hitler had survived a bomb attack in his devastated headquarters. Around him, 4 were dead, 9 seriously injured, whom he visited in the hospital. The attack had been organized by senior officers seeking to negotiate Germany's surrender with the Allies. This plot against Hitler triggered thousands of arrests, tortures, and murders. Speer, Himmler, Goering, and Goebbels now all understood the risks of betraying him, yet each would make very different choices. Hitler's accomplices were expected to follow him even to the sacrifice of their lives, now trapped by a Führer who had lost his lucidity. By March 1945, he moved in slow motion. Propaganda images showed him sitting in front of maps, facing paralyzed generals too fearful to speak of defeat. He dominated, rebuffed, and yelled at them. Yet, in spring 1945, he moved little flags and pawns that no longer mattered. On April 20th, 1945, Hitler's 56th birthday, the last filming of him with Goering and Himmler occurred. All smiles were an illusion. Hours later, Goering and Himmler hastily abandoned Hitler as he decided to stay in Berlin. Goering fled to southern Germany because remaining in Berlin meant certain death. Soviet soldiers crushed the city under bombardment. In a bunker beneath the monumental chancellery of the 3 main accomplices, only Goebbels remained holed up with Hitler. If it led to suicide, death, or defeat, it mattered little. Dr. Goebbels, chief propagandist, had staged the myth of this death and sacrifice to resonate for centuries. As the empire crumbled, on April 21st, Goebbels delivered a final radio message to the Germans. "I stay in Berlin accompanied by all my cabinet. My wife and children are here and will stay in Berlin." On April 30th, 1945, at 3 p.m., Hitler committed suicide. According to his last wishes, he designated Joseph Goebbels as his official successor. But Goebbels was chancellor only briefly. When the Soviets reached the Chancellery Gardens, they discovered the charred bodies of Joseph and Magda Goebbels, along with their 6 children, whom they had poisoned before committing suicide. Magda Goebbels and her husband, convinced that no future could exist without Nazism, extinguished the next generation. Across Germany, the Allies discovered similar scenes of anonymous Nazis committing suicide with their families. Unlike Goebbels, Himmler and Goering remained political and strategic, leaving options open to survive. Hermann Goering took refuge at his residence near the Germany-Austria border. Before his death, Hitler had sacked him, having previously appointed him as successor. On April 23, 1945, Goering sent a confidential telegram offering to assume Hitler's duties if necessary, believing he was in a better position than Hitler in Berlin. Hitler considered this a serious betrayal, dismissing Goering from all functions. In May 1945, Goering surrendered to the Americans. His wife and daughter were kept in safe custody. Goering, still convinced he could negotiate a surrender with honors as a marshal, quickly realized that the Allies demanded unconditional surrender. Hitler was also betrayed by his faithful Heinrich Himmler, leader of the SS, who went on the run. Since February 1945, to save his life, Himmler secretly contacted the Allies to negotiate surrender, even allowing Red Cross buses to save over 13,000 prisoners from the camps. Himmler played a double game at the end of the war, negotiating behind Hitler's back. His disconnection from reality became evident. He truly believed the Allies would accept negotiations from a position of strength. When Himmler realized that he was no longer credible, he tried to hide among captured German soldiers, hoping to disappear into the masses under a false identity. Yet, near Hamburg, he was recognized. During a search of the house he was hiding in by an English officer, Himmler bit down on a cyanide capsule he had kept hidden in his mouth, dying instantly. The killer of the century would never be held accountable. He had sought to escape responsibility, not merely by fleeing, but by committing suicide to avoid facing a judge. On the same day in Flensburg, the last responsible Nazis were arrested, including Hitler's protege, Albert Speer, the architect and minister of armaments. By the summer of 1945, among those closest to Hitler, only Goering and Speer remained alive. Even Höss survived, all destined to answer for their crimes before the judges, still hoping to make it out alive. On November 20th, 1945, in Nuremberg, the trial of the century began. American, British, Russian, and French magistrates convened to judge the 24 greatest living Nazi criminals. All faced the possibility of the death penalty and, for the first time in history, were charged with the new crime of crimes against humanity. Accused number 1 was Hermann Goering. Slimmed down and cured of his drug addiction, he felt combative and in great shape. From the start, Goering treated the trial like a fight. According to American procedure, defendants were supposed to plead guilty or not guilty, but Goering had prepared a long tirade. When he attempted to speak beyond his plea, the president of the tribunal interrupted, informing him that defendants were not authorized to make statements. They were to plead only guilty or not guilty. Goering declared, "Not guilty." All defendants would follow suit. During the trial, Goering sought to escape the prospect of death, defending Hitler's vision for Germany and attempting to justify the regime's actions. Yet the judges had prepared an unassailable counter. They presented the horrifying images filmed during the liberation of the camps by Americans and Russians, bearing permanent witness to the atrocities organized by the defendants. Goering looked away, realizing that his defense was collapsing. The testimony of Rudolf Höss, Auschwitz's commandant, further overwhelmed the accused. Even as Höss described the harsh and methodical treatment of prisoners, the defendants continued to defend the Nazi regime. Only one would deny all knowledge of the Holocaust, Albert Speer, Hitler's closest confidant and architect, who claimed ignorance of the regime's worst crimes, even as he prepared Germany for unparalleled suffering. After 10 months of trial, on October 1st, 1946, the verdicts were pronounced. Hermann Wilhelm Goering was condemned to death by hanging. 12 defendants received the same sentence, while Speer's strategy succeeded. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Goering, refusing to die like a common criminal, desired execution as a soldier by firing squad, a request the court denied. In his final provocation, hours before his scheduled execution, Goering secured a poison capsule with the complicity of an American guard and committed suicide in his cell, still determined to leave his mark on history. He remarked confidently that, though condemned now, in 50 years you'll see, we'll have small statuettes of Hermann Goering in every German apartment. Those responsible for Auschwitz were handed over to Polish justice, tried, and in cases like Rudolf Höss, executed at the very camps where they had committed their crimes. Höss's cold demeanor revealed no true remorse. He insisted he had merely obeyed orders. Years passed, and among Hitler's inner circle, only one remained alive, mastering the art of deception, Albert Speer. When he was released from Spandau prison near Berlin in 1966 at age 61, he attracted global media attention. The former architect and minister became a sought-after author, publishing memoirs written in prison, translated into 14 languages, selling over 1 million copies. For 2 years, Speer captivated the world, recounting the inner workings of Hitler's power. He portrayed himself as a man unaware of the regime's darkest crimes, claiming ignorance of the extermination of Jews. Yet, in the 1970s, revelations surfaced. Photos from his 1943 visit to Mauthausen, where over 200,000 died, and his awareness of Himmler's references to extermination showed his complicity. With modern knowledge, Speer would likely have been sentenced to death at Nuremberg. Beneath his bourgeois mask, he had concealed a cold, dangerous political nature. Speer would escape accountability, dying before the full truth could fully confront him. Hitler's last relatives died quietly. Josef Mengele, the infamous Angel of Death, perished in Brazil in 1979, never captured by justice. None of the major criminals who had worked tirelessly for Hitler have marked graves today. Their ashes were scattered or buried anonymously to prevent glorification. Their traces gradually vanish. At the end of a forested, lost path, among abandoned ruins, lie the remnants of Hitler's favorite house, the place where all his closest accomplices once convened.